My name is Rebecca Williams, and at 34, I finally achieved my lifelong dream of opening my own bakery. The mint green storefront with Sweet Dreams Bakery in gold lettering looked perfect that morning. I spent hours arranging pastries in the display case, my heart racing with excitement. My family would arrive soon for the grand opening, the same family who always told me to get a real job. I never imagined how this day would unfold. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like and subscribe button, and stick around to see if sweet dreams can overcome bitter reality. I was 8 years old when my grandmother Evelyn first let me help her bake cookies in her warm, flour-dusted kitchen. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon seemed magical, and watching people's faces light up when they tasted her creations made me feel like we were spreading joy through sugar and butter. Grandmother had a tattered recipe book, pages yellowed and stained with decades of use, filled with handwritten notes and secret techniques passed down through generations. Baking isn't just about following recipes, Becca, she'd tell me, gently guiding my small hands as I learned to knead dough. It's about putting love into everything you make. People can taste the difference. By 12, I was experimenting with my own recipes, often failing spectacularly but occasionally creating something that made even my critical mother raise her eyebrows in surprise. While other kids played video games, I watched cooking shows and practiced piping techniques with makeshift pastry bags. College was a compromise with my parents. They insisted on a practical degree, so I majored in business administration while working part-time at a local bakery called Flour Power. The owner, Diane, recognized my passion and gave me increasingly more responsibility, allowing me to create weekend specials that eventually developed a small but loyal following. "You've got talent, kid," Diane told me one evening as we closed shop. "More than I did at your age. Don't waste it in some corporate job." After graduation, I made another compromise with my parents. I'd work in marketing for 2 years to establish myself before pursuing culinary school. Those were 2 miserable years sitting in a cubicle, daydreaming about buttercream while creating spreadsheets. I saved every penny possible, living in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates and never taking vacations. When I finally enrolled in the prestigious Hamilton Culinary Institute, it felt like coming home. For the first time, my obsessive attention to detail was an asset, not a quirk to be tolerated. I specialized in French pastry, staying late every night to perfect my technique while classmates went out drinking. My internship with Chef Tyler Montgomery at Sucre in New York City turned into a full-time position. Tyler was demanding and exacting, famous for making assistants cry, but he recognized my determination. Under his guidance, I learned to transform simple ingredients into edible art. 2 years later, I was recruited by Chef Sophia Chen to help open her new pâtisserie, where I eventually became head pastry chef. "You're too good to work for someone else forever," Sophia told me one day after a particularly successful holiday season. "You should think about your own place." The idea took root and wouldn't let go. At night, I sketched bakery layouts and drafted business plans. I researched small business loans and created spreadsheets projecting costs and revenue. I developed signature recipes that combined my grandmother's homey traditions with the refined techniques I'd learned. Leaving my position with Sophia was terrifying. I had security, prestige, and a comfortable salary. But at 33, I realized that if I didn't take the leap now, I might never do it. I chose to return to my hometown of Mapleton rather than stay in New York City. The rent would be lower, competition less fierce, and I knew the community. Plus, it meant being closer to my family, which I convinced myself was a good thing despite our complicated relationship. Finding the right location took months. I walked every street, considering foot traffic, neighboring businesses, and the feel of each potential space. When I found the vacant corner shop on Maple Street with large windows and vintage tile flooring, I knew it was the one. The building had character, history, and excellent natural light that would make my pastries look even more tempting. The renovation process tested my patience and budget. The plumbing needed complete replacement, the ancient electrical system couldn't handle modern equipment, and I discovered water damage behind one wall. Each setback meant more money and delayed opening, leading to sleepless nights worrying I'd made a catastrophic mistake. During the renovation, curious neighbors would peek through the windows, asking questions whenever I stepped outside. I started bringing samples of potential menu items, gathering feedback and building relationships. Mrs. Jenkins from the bookstore across the street brought me coffee most mornings. Mitchell, who owned the hardware store, gave me advice on contractors and occasionally discounts on supplies. By the time the renovations were complete, I'd already developed a small community of supporters. The mint green paint for the exterior was custom mixed to match the color of my grandmother's kitchen. The gold-lettered sign, Sweet Dreams Bakery, was hand-painted by a local artist. Inside, I created a space that balanced whimsy with elegance, marble countertops, vintage display cases, and comfortable seating where people could linger over coffee and conversation. Each element was carefully chosen, down to the custom plates and the antique rolling pins displayed on one wall. This wasn't just a business, it was the physical manifestation of my dream, built one painful decision and sleepless night at a time. My family never really understood my passion for baking. My father, Thomas Williams, built a successful accounting firm through decades of disciplined work and expected his children to follow similarly sensible paths. He viewed cooking as a hobby, not a career, something women did at home for their families, not in professional kitchens for paying customers. "It's a tough business, Rebecca," he'd say whenever my career came up at family gatherings. "Most restaurants fail within a year. Why not use your business degree for something more stable?" His concern might have seemed loving to outsiders, but I recognized the dismissal beneath it. My mother, Martha, was even less subtle. A former high school principal who valued academic achievement above all else, she viewed my culinary ambitions as a personal failure, as if I'd deliberately chosen to disappoint her. "All that education just to bake cookies," she once remarked during Thanksgiving dinner, causing an uncomfortable silence around the table. "At least your brother made something of himself." Jason, my older brother by 3 years, was the golden child, Harvard Business School, management consultant, perfect wife, perfect house in the suburbs. He and Stephanie had the kind of success my parents understood and approved of: prestigious business cards, retirement plans, and a lifestyle that impressed their friends. Jason wasn't unkind about my career choices, but his faint praise often felt worse than criticism. "Hey, if it makes you happy, that's what matters," he'd say with the benevolent condescension of someone who believed he'd made objectively better choices. My younger sister Amanda was the only family member who consistently supported my culinary journey. As a struggling artist who painted landscapes that rarely sold, she understood what it meant to pursue passion over practicality. But even her support was complicated by her own financial instability and occasional envy that I had found a way to potentially monetize my creativity while she still worked retail jobs to support her art. Then there was Aunt Karen, my mother's sister, whose biting commentary on everyone's life choices was legendary in our family. She took particular interest in my career, perhaps because her own daughter Megan had become a moderately successful lifestyle influencer who considered herself an authority on aesthetic experiences. "Well, I suppose there's dignity in any honest work," Aunt Karen said when I told her about culinary school, as if I'd announced a career in waste management rather than fine pastry. Despite this history, I still desperately wanted my family's approval, or at least their genuine support. When the bakery was nearly ready to open, I made personal phone calls to each family member to invite them to the grand opening, hoping that seeing my dream realized might finally change their perspective. My father was polite but brief. "We'll try to stop by, Rebecca. It's a busy time at the firm." My mother sounded skeptical. "A grand opening? Isn't that a bit much for a small-town bakery?" Jason and Stephanie promised to come but warned they might be late due to a morning meeting. "We can probably swing by around 11 if that works," Stephanie said, making it sound like they were doing me a favor. Amanda was genuinely excited. "I wouldn't miss it for anything. Can I bring my new boyfriend Dave? He's got a great camera and could take some photos for your social media." Aunt Karen asked detailed questions about the menu, location, and business plan, each question feeling like preparation for future criticism. "Megan says pastry shops need a signature item to attract influencers. What's yours going to be?" After each call, I felt a mix of hope and dread. Part of me believed that seeing the physical manifestation of my dream, the beautiful space, the artful pastries, the happy customers, would finally make them understand. Maybe they'd finally see that my path, while different from their expectations, was valid and valuable. The other part of me prepared for disappointment, for the subtle digs and backhanded compliments that had characterized our relationship for years. I rehearsed responses to potential criticisms, determined to maintain my professional composure no matter what. This time will be different, I told myself as I finalized the opening day menu. They'll see what I built and finally understand. I selected recipes that showcased both technical skill and heartfelt connection, including an updated version of my grandmother's cinnamon rolls, the very first thing she taught me to bake. I sent formal invitations after the phone calls, beautifully designed cards with gold embossing that matched the bakery's aesthetic. Inside each, I wrote personal notes expressing how much their presence would mean to me on this important day. The night before sending these invitations, I sat alone in the nearly finished bakery, surrounded by gleaming equipment and freshly painted walls, and allowed myself to hope that this milestone might heal some of the distance between us. That my family might finally see me, really see me, for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. The final week before opening was a blur of activity and anxiety. Each morning I woke before dawn, my mind immediately racing with to-do lists. Each night I collapsed into bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep, my dreams filled with forgotten orders and disapproving family members. Bailey Matthews was my first hire, a charming college student with bright blue hair and an infectious laugh who would handle the front counter. During training, her genuine enthusiasm for every pastry she tasted reassured me that I'd made the right choice. "These lemon tarts are insane," she gushed during our tasting session. "Like, people are going to freak out when they try these." Marcus Johnson, my assistant baker, came with 5 years of experience and a calm demeanor that balanced my occasional panic. When I dropped a tray of chocolate eclairs 2 days before opening, he quietly started preparing a new batch while I fought back tears of frustration. "Happens to everyone," he said simply. Even Chef Thomas had bad days. Together we developed the opening day menu, classic French pastries like croissants and pain au chocolat, American favorites including cinnamon rolls and chocolate chip cookies, and my signature creations, lavender honey madeleines and cardamom rose cake that combined traditional techniques with unexpected flavors. The local newspaper sent a reporter named Nathan Cooper for a pre-opening story. He arrived with a photographer and spent 2 hours asking thoughtful questions about my journey and philosophy while the photographer captured images of the space and pastries. "You've created something special here," Nathan said as he was leaving, after tasting the cardamom rose cake. "This town needs more people following their passions like this." His article, published 3 days before opening, was more generous than I expected, describing Sweet Dreams as a sophisticated yet welcoming addition to Mapleton's growing culinary scene and my pastries as worth breaking any diet for. The photo of me in my chef's coat, surrounded by my creations, made me look confident and professional, someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The night before opening, I stayed at the bakery until midnight, perfecting the display case arrangement, adjusting lighting to make each pastry look its most tempting, and second-guessing every decision I'd made over the past year. I prepared a special section with a reserved for family sign, setting out our best china and placing small gift bags with personalized treats for each family member. For my father, bourbon pecan tarts that played on his favorite nightcap. For my mother, the precisely crafted French macarons she once admired in a Philadelphia bakery window. For Jason and Stephanie, sophisticated chocolate entremet cakes that would impress their cosmopolitan palates. For Amanda, colorful cookies inspired by her painting style. Even for Aunt Karen and Megan, I created picture-perfect pastries designed to be both delicious and Instagram-worthy. I arrived at 4 a.m. on opening day, my stomach in knots. By 6:30, the ovens had worked their magic, filling the bakery with intoxicating aromas. Marcus worked silently beside me, both of us moving in the choreographed rhythm we'd practiced all week. Bailey arrived at 7:15, arranging fresh flowers on each table and polishing already spotless display cases. At 7:45, 15 minutes before our official opening, I took a moment alone in my small office. I touched the framed photo of grandmother Evelyn that sat on my desk and whispered, "I hope you'd be proud." Then I smoothed my chef's coat, checked my appearance one last time, and went out to open the doors. A small line had already formed outside: Mrs. Jenkins from the bookstore, Mitchell from the hardware store, and several other locals who had watched the renovation progress with interest. Their excited faces as they entered and the genuine compliments on both the space and the pastries created exactly the atmosphere I had hoped for. "These croissants are better than what I had in Paris last year," Mitchell declared loudly after his first bite, causing several other customers to immediately order the same. By 9:30, we had a steady stream of customers and overwhelmingly positive feedback. The family section remained empty, but they weren't expected until closer to 11 o'clock. Still, I found myself glancing at the door every time the bell chimed, a mixture of anticipation and dread growing stronger as the morning progressed. "Your family coming today?" Bailey asked during a brief lull, noticing my distraction. "They should be," I replied, trying to sound casual. "My parents, brother and his wife, sister, aunt, and cousin." "That's awesome," she said sincerely. "They must be so proud of you." I managed a smile but didn't correct her assumption. Instead, I busied myself with refreshing the display case and chatting with customers, trying to focus on the success of the morning rather than the knot of anxiety growing tighter with each passing minute. At 10:45, the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see my parents enter. My father wore his standard business casual attire, as if stopping by a child's bakery opening was just another appointment in his day. My mother followed, scrutinizing the space with the critical eye she once used to evaluate student projects. I quickly wiped my hands on my apron and moved from behind the counter to greet them, conscious of maintaining a professional demeanor despite my racing heart. "Mom, Dad, you made it. Welcome to Sweet Dreams." I gestured around the busy shop, unable to keep the pride from my voice. My father nodded, offering a brief, awkward hug. "Place looks nice, Rebecca." "Busy too." "Very quaint," my mother added, which I knew was not a compliment coming from her. Her eyes narrowed at the mint green walls. "Interesting color choice." I guided them to the reserved section, where Bailey promptly brought a selection of pastries and coffee. "Everything's on the house for family today. I prepared some special items I thought you might enjoy." My father picked up a bourbon pecan tart, examining it before taking a cautious bite. "Not bad," he said, which from him was practically effusive praise. My mother sipped her coffee without touching the macarons. "The cups are lovely." "Vintage?" "Yes, I found them at an estate sale and..." The bell chimed again, and Jason and Stephanie walked in, both checking their phones even as they approached. Jason wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, while Stephanie was dressed for brunch at a country club rather than a bakery visit. "Hey, sis, sorry we're late," Jason said, finally pocketing his phone. "Board meeting ran over." "Place looks cute." Stephanie air-kissed my cheek. "So charming, Rebecca." "Very, small-town chic." I directed them to the family table, where they greeted our parents with more warmth than they'd shown me. Bailey brought their pastries, which Stephanie immediately began photographing for the gram before trying. Amanda arrived minutes later, bringing genuine enthusiasm, and her new boyfriend Dave, who indeed carried a professional-looking camera. She hugged me tightly. "This is amazing, Becca. Everything is exactly how you described it." She twirled around, taking in the space with genuine appreciation. "I'm so proud of you." For a brief moment, I felt the validation I'd been seeking. But then Aunt Karen's voice cut through the bakery, loud enough to turn heads. "Martha, the parking situation is atrocious. I had to walk nearly a block in these shoes." She entered with Megan trailing behind her, both looking as if they'd dressed for a fashion show rather than a bakery visit. "Rebecca, dear, couldn't you have chosen a location with better parking?" I forced a smile. "Hello, Aunt Karen, Megan. So glad you could make it." The downtown location is actually ideal for foot traffic, which is essential for a bakery. Megan was already scanning the space with a critical eye, her phone in hand. The lighting is a bit flat for photos. Have you considered more dramatic fixtures? Ambience is everything for social engagement. I directed them to the family table, now crowded with relatives who seemed more interested in talking to each other than acknowledging my achievement. As I returned to help a customer, I overheard my mother's voice. "It's smaller than I expected. I hope she can cover the overhead." Jason responded, "The location's decent, but the business model seems limited. She should consider wholesale to local restaurants to diversify revenue." I busied myself with customers, grateful for the steady stream of locals expressing genuine delight in my creations. Mrs. Jenkins loudly proclaimed my cinnamon rolls the best I've had in 70 years of living, which earned a momentary glance from my mother but no comment. Between serving customers, I would check on my family, refreshing their coffee and offering additional pastries. They remained clustered together, occasionally glancing around but mostly engaged in their own conversations. Amanda tried several times to redirect discussion to the bakery, but her efforts were largely ignored. Rebecca always did have a knack for desserts, and Karen commented after finally trying a macaron. "Though these are awfully sweet. Is that the trend now?" Megan hadn't touched her cardamom rose cake, too busy arranging and rearranging other pastries for the perfect photo. The flavor combinations are interesting, but people really want classic and familiar with a visual twist. That's what gets engagement. I maintained my professional smile, thanking regular customers for their compliments and managing the growing line at the counter. But each time I glanced at the family table, the knot in my stomach tightened. They were here physically, but their emotional absence was palpable. Bailey noticed my distraction during a brief lull. "Your family seems nice," she offered diplomatically. "They're just not big on public displays of emotion," I replied automatically, the excuse familiar after years of use. As noon approached, the initial rush began to subside. I finally had a moment to join my family properly, sliding into an empty chair with a fresh pot of coffee. "So, what do you think?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "The cardamom rose cake is my signature creation. I'd love your thoughts." "It's very unique," my mother said, having finally tried a small bite. "Perhaps a bit too exotic for local tastes?" My father checked his watch. "The place seems popular enough. How are the numbers looking?" First quarter is always the hardest for new businesses. Before I could answer, I overheard a customer at the counter asking Bailey about catering options. I excused myself to handle the inquiry, which turned into a substantial order for an upcoming office event. As I finished writing up the catering request, I caught fragments of conversation from the family table. "Just hope she has a backup plan if this doesn't pan out." From my father. "Could have been a department head by now with her business degree." From my mother. "These pastries are nice but pretty basic compared to what we get in the city." From Stephanie. Each comment landed like a small blow, chipping away at the confidence I'd built throughout the successful morning. I busied myself with rearranging already perfect displays, fighting to maintain my professional composure as the grand opening I'd dreamed of crumbled around me. The final straw came shortly after 1 p.m. I was behind the counter, packaging a dozen assorted pastries for an elderly gentleman who had become an instant regular, having visited twice already that morning. "My wife is going to be thrilled," he told me, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. 52 years married, and I still love surprising her with little treats. As I carefully arranged his selections, Aunt Karen's voice carried clearly across the now quieter bakery. She had taken a bite of my lavender honey madeleine and made a dramatic face of displeasure. "This tastes like soap. Who puts flowers in food?" She set the half-eaten pastry down with exaggerated distaste. "I suppose this is what passes for innovation these days." Several customers turned to look, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. The elderly gentleman gave me a sympathetic glance as I handed him his box, my hand slightly trembling. I might have let it go, had become expert at letting my family's criticisms slide off over the years, but then my father leaned over to Jason, his voice just loud enough to carry. "It's a cute little operation. Probably won't last the year, but it's good she's getting it out of her system." Jason nodded sagely. "The artisanal market is saturated. Without significant capital for expansion or a unique value proposition beyond homemade quality, the growth potential is limited." Stephanie picked at a croissant, breaking it apart without eating it. "These are fine, but pretty basic. Nothing you couldn't get at any decent bakery." Megan, who had spent more time arranging pastries for photos than actually tasting them, sighed dramatically. "The aesthetic is confused. Not minimalist enough to be modern, not ornate enough to be traditional. Nothing here would perform well on my feed." Then came my mother's voice, speaking to Amanda but loud enough to reach me clearly. "It's a phase, just like your painting. Eventually, she'll realize she's wasting her potential and find something more suitable. Thomas and I are prepared for her to move back home when this runs its course." Something inside me snapped, a dam breaking after years of holding back the flood. I set down the tray I was carrying with deliberate care, untied my apron, and walked directly to the family table. The bakery had quieted, as if the remaining customers sensed the coming storm. "Is that what you think this is?" My voice was steady despite the trembling in my hands. "A phase? A cute hobby? Something to get out of my system?" My mother looked startled, not having realized I could hear her. "Rebecca, we're just concerned." "No." I cut her off, years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. "You're not concerned. You're dismissive. You've always been dismissive." I gestured around the bakery, my bakery, built from years of sacrifice and determination. "This isn't a whim. This is my life's work. I spent 8 years training under world-class pastry chefs. I saved every penny for 5 years to afford this place. I renovated it myself while working 60-hour weeks. I developed these recipes through thousands of hours of practice and refinement." My voice grew stronger with each word. "And you all came here today, to what should have been one of the most important days of my life, and you couldn't even pretend to be supportive." My father frowned. "Now Rebecca, that's not fair. We showed up, didn't we?" "Showing up isn't support," I replied. "Support would have been asking me about my journey instead of immediately critiquing my business model. Support would have been complimenting the pastries you liked instead of pointing out what you found lacking. Support would have been acknowledging that I built something real and valuable here, even if it's not what you would have chosen for me." I turned to Aunt Karen. "Lavender is a classic flavor in French pastry. If you'd asked instead of mocking, I could have told you about studying under Chef Pascal in Paris, who taught me that technique." To Megan, "I didn't design this place for Instagram. I designed it to make people feel welcome and comfortable, to create a space where food and conversation could be enjoyed together." To Stephanie and Jason, "These basic pastries take 3 days to make properly. The lamination alone for the croissants requires a technique that took me years to perfect. But you wouldn't know that because you never asked." Finally, to my parents, "I'm not coming home when this runs its course because this isn't a phase. This is my career. This is my dream. And if you can't see that, if you can't find it in yourselves to genuinely support me rather than tolerate me, then perhaps you shouldn't be here at all." The silence that followed was deafening. My family sat frozen, shock evident on their faces. My mother's mouth opened and closed without sound. My father's expression darkened with anger or perhaps shame, it was hard to tell the difference. I became acutely aware that the entire bakery was watching. Regular customers, new visitors, Bailey and Marcus, all witnesses to this family implosion on what should have been a purely joyous day. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval," I said, my voice finally breaking. "I've worked harder, studied longer, sacrificed more than any of you realize. But today I'm done seeking validation from people who are determined not to give it. If you can't genuinely support my dream, then I don't need you here pretending." My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I think we've overstayed our welcome. Martha, let's go. My mother gathered her purse, her face flushed with embarrassment or anger. Rebecca, this display is completely inappropriate. Actually, came a voice from across the bakery, I think it's long overdue. Nathan Cooper, the reporter who had written the pre-opening article, stood near the counter with a notepad in hand. He had apparently returned to capture opening day color for a follow-up piece. What did you say? My father asked, turning toward him. I said it's overdue, Nathan repeated calmly. I interviewed Rebecca last week about her journey to opening this bakery. She talked about training under internationally renowned chefs, about developing her own techniques, about the challenges of securing financing and renovating this space. What I didn't hear was a single mention of the incredible family support that most entrepreneurs rely on. Now I understand why. My parents exchanged glances, visibly uncomfortable with this public assessment. Without another word, they headed for the door. Jason and Stephanie quickly followed, murmuring awkward goodbyes. Aunt Karen huffed indignantly, pulling Megan along despite her cousin's obvious desire to capture the drama for her social media. Only Amanda remained seated, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Becca. I should have said something sooner. I stood in the middle of my bakery, suddenly exhausted and fighting back tears of my own. The silence stretched uncomfortably until it was broken by a slow, deliberate clapping from the corner. Mrs. Jenkins, the 70-year-old bookstore owner, stood and continued applauding. Bravest thing I've seen in years, dear. Well done. One by one, other customers joined in until the small bakery filled with applause. Marcus emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, and gave me a respectful nod. Bailey squeezed my arm supportively. Well, I said, my voice shaky but determined as I retrieved my apron from the counter, who wants fresh cinnamon rolls? They should be coming out of the oven right about now. In the hour after my family left, something remarkable happened. The bakery, which had fallen uncomfortably quiet during our confrontation, transformed into a space of unexpected connection and community. Mrs. Jenkins pulled her chair up to where Amanda and Dave still sat, introducing herself with grandmotherly warmth. Your sister has quite the talent. And quite the backbone, too. Mitchell from the hardware store joined them, bringing over fresh coffee for everyone. Reminds me of when I stood up to my old man about taking over the family store instead of selling it to a chain. Hardest and best thing I ever did. Other locals began sharing their own stories of family tensions and difficult stands taken, the accountant who disappointed his family by not becoming a doctor, the teacher whose parents wanted her to pursue law, the nurse whose family thought her too smart for such work. Nathan, the reporter, approached me as I mechanically refilled the display case. I hope you don't mind that I spoke up. Actually, I appreciate it, I admitted. Though I'm sure this isn't what you expected to cover today. He smiled. Sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we plan to write. Would you mind if I included some of what happened in my follow-up piece? Not the personal details, but the broader theme of pursuing passion despite obstacles? I considered this for a moment. That would be fine. Maybe it will help someone else feeling trapped between expectations and dreams. Amanda appeared at my side, I still red from crying. I'm staying to help for the rest of the day, she announced. Dave too. Just tell us what to do. You don't have to. I want to, she interrupted firmly. I should have stood up for you all those years. Let me start making up for it now. Bailey quickly trained Amanda on the register while Dave offered to take professional photos for the bakery's website and social media, much better than Megan's contrived Instagram shots, Amanda noted with a small smile. As the afternoon progressed, a steady stream of customers continued to arrive. Word had spread through town about both the quality of the pastries and the morning's drama, bringing in curious locals who became instant devotees after their first bite. These eclairs are magnificent, declared the high school principal, who had worked with my mother years earlier. Martha Williams never did appreciate true talent when it was right in front of her. Around 3 o'clock, the bell chimed and a tall, elegant woman in chef's whites entered. I nearly dropped the tray I was carrying. Chef Sophia? What are you doing here? My former mentor and boss smiled warmly. Did you think I'd miss your grand opening? Sorry I'm late, flight from New York was delayed. She embraced me tightly, then held me at arm's length to examine my face. You look exhausted but exhilarated. The mark of a successful opening day. I gave her a quick tour of the bakery, now humming with activity. She nodded approvingly at the space, the pastries, and particularly at the obvious community support. You've created something special here, Rebecca. Not just excellent pastries, though these are superb, she added, sampling a lavender honey madeleine. You've created a gathering place. That's much harder and far more valuable. When I hesitantly told her about the confrontation with my family, she laughed. About time. I wondered when you'd finally stand up to them. Do you know how many times I wanted to call your parents and tell them exactly how talented their daughter is? How rare your combination of technical skill and creative vision. Why didn't you? I asked. Because it wouldn't have mattered coming from me, she replied wisely. Some battles we have to fight ourselves. As closing time approached, I found myself surrounded by an unexpected support system, Bailey and Marcus who had performed flawlessly under pressure, Amanda and Dave who had stepped in without hesitation, Nathan whose article would share my story beyond our small town, Mrs. Jenkins, Mitchell, and other locals who had transformed from customers to community. And Chef Sophia, whose presence validated my professional journey. I should warn you, Nathan said as he prepared to leave, my article is likely to bring in quite a crowd tomorrow. Your family drama might turn out to be the best marketing strategy yet. I laughed for what felt like the first time that day. I'm not sure I'd recommend it, but I'll take the silver lining. After the last customer left, Amanda helped me close up while Chef Sophia and Marcus discussed technique in the kitchen. Bailey had tallied the day's sales, nearly double my projected first-day revenue, despite the family drama, or perhaps partly because of it. So, Amanda said as we wiped down the last table, Mom called me 3 times already. Dad too. I haven't answered. I sighed. You don't have to choose sides, Mandy. I'm not choosing sides. I'm acknowledging reality. She placed her hand over mine. They were wrong. They've always been wrong about your dreams. And maybe about mine too. As we finished closing procedures, I found an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a brief note in my father's precise handwriting. Your grandmother would have been proud. I should have said that earlier. Dad. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was an acknowledgement, the first real one he had ever offered about my chosen path. Chef Sophia insisted on taking us all out for a celebratory dinner. As we walked to the restaurant, I looked back at my bakery, the mint green storefront with Sweet Dreams Bakery in gold lettering glowing softly in the evening light. For the first time, I saw it clearly not just as my dream realized but as something that belonged to this community as much as to me. Something that would endure regardless of my family's approval or disapproval. I had built this. And in doing so, I had also built a new kind of family, one connected by shared passion, mutual respect, and genuine support rather than mere biology. 1 week after the grand opening, Sweet Dreams Bakery had settled into a rhythm that exceeded all my business projections. The line each morning started forming 15 minutes before opening, and we consistently sold out of several items by early afternoon despite increasing production. Nathan's follow-up article, titled Rising to the Occasion, How One Baker's Courage Created Community, had gone viral locally, bringing in customers from neighboring towns. He had handled the family confrontation with surprising delicacy, framing it as a universal story of pursuing passion despite obstacles rather than airing dirty laundry. Amanda had become a fixture at the bakery, coming in after her shifts at the art gallery to help during the afternoon rush. Her boyfriend Dave's professional photographs had dramatically improved our social media presence, leading to features in several regional food blogs. Have you heard from Mom and Dad? Amanda asked one afternoon as we prepped for the following day. Dad left a voicemail yesterday, I admitted, measuring flour with practiced precision. He asked if we could meet for coffee next week. Just the two of us. Are you going to go? I sighed, brushing flour from my hands. Probably. Not because I need his approval anymore, but because I'm tired of the tension. Life's too short for perpetual family estrangement. What about Mom? Nothing directly. I moved to the industrial mixer, avoiding Amanda's eyes. But Bailey mentioned that someone matching Mom's description has been standing across the street several mornings this week, watching the bakery. She never comes in. Amanda raised an eyebrow. Reconnaissance mission? Maybe. I smiled despite myself. Or maybe she's trying to figure out how to cross a bridge after declaring it wasn't worth building. That evening, I discovered my mother had created an anonymous Instagram account that followed the bakery page and liked every post without comment. It was such a characteristically indirect approach that I couldn't help but laugh. Jason had sent a formal email 3 days after the opening, his corporate communication style unable to fully mask what seemed like a genuine apology. Upon reflection, I recognized that my comments about your business model were presumptuous and failed to acknowledge the significant achievement your bakery represents. I would welcome the opportunity to visit again under more positive circumstances. Stephanie had sent an enormous flower arrangement with a card saying simply, "Your croissants are actually better than the ones in Paris." I was jealous. I'm sorry. It was perhaps the most honest communication we'd ever had. Aunt Karen and Megan remained silent, but I hadn't really expected otherwise. Some relationships were perhaps better left at a distance. The most unexpected development had been my growing friendship with Nathan Cooper. What had begun as a professional relationship had evolved through several coffee meetings to discuss business promotion into something that felt increasingly personal. I'm impressed by how you've handled everything, he told me during one such meeting. Most people would still be nursing their wounds, but you've channeled it all into making the bakery even more successful. I shrugged, oddly comfortable with his compliments in a way I'd never been with my family's rare praise. I've spent too many years letting their expectations define me. It's surprisingly liberating to let that go. The bakery's financial success had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. By the end of the first month, we had not only covered operating costs but showed a modest profit, practically unheard of in the restaurant industry, where new businesses typically operated at a loss for the first quarter. Marcus had proven himself invaluable, suggesting several operational efficiencies and developing 2 new pastries that had become instant bestsellers. Bailey had organized a system for special orders that streamlined our workflow and increased revenue. Both had received well-deserved raises, cementing their commitment to the bakery's future. Regular customers had become friends, sharing life updates along with their pastry preferences. Mrs. Jenkins brought books she thought I might enjoy. Mitchell offered handyman services whenever anything needed fixing. The elderly gentleman who had witnessed the family confrontation, Mr. Peterson, I'd learned, brought his wife to the bakery for their anniversary, telling her the story of the brave baker who stood up for her dreams. One quiet evening as I was experimenting with new recipes, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The little girl in grandmother Evelyn's kitchen, the determined culinary student, the professional pastry chef, and now the business owner, all versions of myself connected by a passion that had never wavered despite the lack of family support. I realized that while I had always framed my story as one of persevering despite my family's disapproval, that narrative gave them too much power. The truth was both simpler and more profound. I had succeeded because I loved what I did enough to keep doing it, regardless of anyone's opinion. The bakery phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a call from a local wedding planner inquiring about our catering services for the upcoming season, an opportunity that could significantly expand the business. As I discussed options and pricing, I jotted notes about potential new hires and equipment upgrades we would need to handle larger orders. The business was growing faster than I'd anticipated, each success building upon the last in a way that felt both exciting and sustainable. Later that evening, I placed a framed photo on the wall behind the counter, a professional shot Dave had taken on opening day. It showed me in my chef's coat, standing proudly in front of the bakery, surrounded by Bailey, Marcus, Amanda, and several regular customers. My chosen family, supporting my chosen dream. Next to it, I hung the first dollar earned, traditionally framed in many small businesses, alongside a small handwritten note: dreams require courage. Baking requires precision. Life requires both. The following morning, I arrived at 4 a.m. as usual, the quiet pre-dawn hours my favorite time in the bakery. As I moved through the familiar routine of mixing, kneading, and shaping, I thought about the future, potential expansion, seasonal menu changes, community events we might host. I realized that standing up to my family had given me more than just emotional liberation. It had cleared space for new relationships, new ideas, and new possibilities unencumbered by the weight of seeking approval I would never receive. As the first batch of Grandmother Evelyn's cinnamon rolls emerged from the oven, filling the bakery with their warm, spicy fragrance, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in years. I could almost hear her voice: "I told you people can taste the difference when something is made with love." She had been right all along. The most important ingredient in any recipe, whether for pastry or for life, was having the courage to follow your own heart. As dawn broke over Sweet Dreams Bakery, I knew with certainty that whatever challenges came next, whether family reconciliations or business expansions or personal growth, I was finally standing on a foundation entirely of my own making. Have you ever had to stand up to family or friends who didn't support your dreams? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you found my journey inspiring. Remember, sometimes the sweetest success comes after the most difficult rises. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope my story gives you the courage to pursue your own dreams, whatever they may be.